This is Brett Hayworth, and welcome to What's the Frequency on Siouxland Public Media. With this show, we give you a wide range of important information on key issues that impact our lives. In February, we took a look at where bills and key issues stand in the Iowa legislature after 1 month, and we will have a 2 months later catch-up in Iowa later in March. Today, we are checking in on where things stand in the state legislatures in the other two Siouxland states of Nebraska and South Dakota. In all three states, there are lots of measures dealing with taxes, education, and social issues, and we want our listeners to have a good understanding of what's going on. Giving the lay of the land in Nebraska and South Dakota are some well-positioned reporters who cover the legislatures. Joining me today on What's the Frequency are Lee Strubinger of South Dakota Public Broadcasting and Fred Knapp of Nebraska Public Media. We begin first in Nebraska, and thanks for joining me, Mr. Knapp.
Pleasure to be here.
To start, I'll share that the Nebraska session started on January 8th and it goes to June 9th, which makes for the longest legislative timetable of the three Siouxland states. Fred, let's start with property taxes. Republican Jim Pillen is in his third year as Nebraska governor. He continues to push for changes in property taxes. Last year, Pillen was dismayed with the state senators for not addressing property tax relief, so he called a special session for the summer. First of all, why is this a top issue for Pillen?
Well, he has an agricultural background as a hog producer, and farmers are among the people that pay the most property taxes because they have so much property. And he describes it as a crisis not only for agriculture but also for homeowners who have seen their valuations rise with the housing market and therefore are always subject to pressure to pay more and more property taxes, even if levy rates remain the same.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess secondly, on property taxes, where do things stand? What has happened with property taxes in this session?
Well, not as much as in recent years, mostly because the state is facing a budget shortfall, whereas in the past they've had COVID money from the federal government that they could set aside and apply to various purposes, freeing up other revenue for property tax relief. Now they're facing a budget shortfall, so their aims are much more limited. The governor has advocated $250 million just to keep property taxes level and not have them go back up again.
Okay. As a follow-up, do you have a feel for, I guess, rank and file Nebraskans, how they view one of the discussions is to have higher sales taxes to offset lower property taxes. Do you have a feel for how Nebraskans typically feel about that?
I think that there are probably mixed feelings. The way it gets expressed in by the time it gets to the legislature, people hate taxes of all kinds. They don't want to pay high property taxes, but they also don't want to tax items that are currently exempt. Last year, there were proposals to remove sales tax exemptions from a bunch of services and goods. This year, the proposals are much more limited. So there are proposals to tax pop and candy, which are currently exempt from sales tax, and certain luxury goods, but they wouldn't raise anywhere near as much money as has been discussed in recent years. So once again, it's a much scaled down.
For this episode of What's the Frequency, we're checking in on the chief issues being discussed in the Nebraska legislature in 2025. And we have reporter Fred Knapp, who is with Nebraska Public Media. I want to move to medical marijuana. The quest to add the ability to use marijuana for medical purposes has had a lot of steps in recent years in Nebraska. The law allowing medical marijuana is to go into effect on July 1st. And this week, some unicameral committees discussed how to set up the framework for basically how to regulate medical marijuana. There also has been some appeals to the Nebraska Supreme Court, I think late last year. Is everything paved? Will that law go into effect on July 1st as things stand now?
Yes, the voters voted for it in an initiative, and the initiative said it'll go into effect July 1st, and that no later than October 1st, the state would begin granting licenses. But as you mentioned, the Attorney General is appealing the approval, saying that there was fraud in the collecting of the signatures for the initiative. And both he and the former governor, now U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts, have written an op-ed advising the legislature to do nothing because they argue that the marijuana is still illegal under federal law and because of the ongoing court case over the initiative and fraud.
Thank you. And why has this been so controversial on both sides? Like what? The opposition to medical marijuana. It's not recreational marijuana, it's medical marijuana. Can you speak to that a little bit from testimony and things that you've heard?
Yes, the opponents claim that medical marijuana is just a Trojan horse for full-fledged legalization, and that other states that have begun by legalizing medical marijuana have gone on to legalize recreational. And so they point to the social ills that they say come from that in terms of health and safety. And so the opposition to medical marijuana is kind of seamless with the opposition to marijuana in general.
Okay, thank you for that. Want to move on to some other issues. State Senator Michaela Cavanaugh has introduced bills that protect marriage regardless of race and gender. 10 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court granted same-sex couples the right to marriage in all 50 states, but Nebraska's Constitution does not recognize same-sex relationships. So therefore, Cavanaugh has proposed bills to allow voters to repeal and revise that article in the Constitution that validates marriage if it's between a man and a woman. Where does this stand in the legislature as we're here in, I guess, early March?
Well, as you point out, the U.S. Supreme Court decision trumps whatever is in the Nebraska Constitution. So it's kind of a symbolic effort, but
okay.
It's at the moment it's stuck in committee, and I would compare this to an issue that we had a couple of years ago, where the Constitution said it prohibited slavery except for people convicted, or involuntary servitude except for people convicted of crimes. Well, once again, the federal government had abolished involuntary servitude, but it was still in the Constitution, and so that one eventually did get on the ballot, and it was the language was taken out of the Constitution, although it was a very close vote.
Okay, thank you. And I want to ask about another measure that State Senator Cavanaugh has introduced. I think this is at least the fourth time in a few years she's introduced a bill that would make lunch free for all Nebraska public and private school students. It would require schools to offer free breakfasts and lunches to students regardless of their federal free or reduced lunch eligibility. State would reimburse schools to offset the cost of that requirement, and the bill is estimated to cost about $90 million. And just one more stat, just over 48% of Nebraska public school students were eligible for free and reduced lunches as we sit currently. Has that measure been decided yet? And if it hasn't, does it face an uphill battle, would you say?
I would say it does, because it's also still in committee, and as you say, the cost is estimated at $90 million, although Senator Cavanaugh disputes that and is willing to make amendments reduce the scope of the program and thereby reduce the costs. But once again, it's running up against the projected budget shortfall. So any measure that proposes to spend a significant amount of money faces an uphill battle.
Okay, thank you. And let's move to a few bills that could impact education, K-12 education in Nebraska. Iowa is one. Several states are debating limiting the use of mobile devices by students during school hours to have them more focused. Is how it is explained. Where do any such bills stand in the Nebraska legislature?
Well, the main bill dealing with this has advanced past the first stage of debate and was approved without any opposition. And what it would do, it would put the legislature on record as requiring schools to have policies to restrict the use of cell phones, but it doesn't say what those policies should be.
Okay.
And so it could be anything from taking them away during the entire course of the school day to letting students carry them around but not use them during class periods, but they could use them during passing periods, when they're changing classes in the hallway or at lunchtime. So there's a wide range of possibilities, and as I say, this is just the legislature going on record saying to school districts, thou shalt have a policy.
Okay.
It doesn't say what the policy
Right.
has to be.
So I guess just saying this back to you. So as you just said, there will be a policy, but individual schools could do what they feel applies for them, what they want best for their students. Is that correct?
Yes, and the policy has to be restrictive in some respect. And once again, the bill still needs to go through 2 more rounds of debate before it's approved, but with no opposition surfacing at the first round, it is likely to be passed, I think.
Okay. For this episode of What's the Frequency, we're checking in on the chief issues being discussed in the Nebraska legislature this spring. We're talking with reporter Fred Knapp. He's a reporter with Nebraska Public Media. State Senator Kathleen Kauth introduced a bill to restrict transgender athletes in Nebraska schools and colleges to teams, locker rooms, and bathrooms corresponding to their sex at birth. Her bill has 20 co-sponsors, and it has the backing also of Governor Pillen. At a recent news conference, he voiced support for that. Where does that initiative stand in the legislature?
Well, it's not clear that it has enough votes to pass. It's going to produce a filibuster if it gets out of committee, and so that would require 2/3 majority or 33 votes in the 49 member legislature to overcome. And the math on that is very close. And Senator Kauth, the bill is not out of committee yet. It's not clear whether it has the votes to get out of committee. At this point, Senator Kauth is working on amendments that might increase its chances, but she has not revealed what those are yet. And so it's just a matter of wait and see at this point.
Okay. Even though the governor wants it and lots of senators want it, the filibuster could ultimately be its demise. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. And then I guess moving education to the college level, state legislators in multiple states, such as Iowa, are also talking about higher education and diversity and inclusion programs. Are any of those sorts of discussions of reining in so-called DEI, are those ongoing in the unicameral this year?
They are. There's a bill that would explicitly prohibit state agencies from having any DEI programs, but sponsor of that bill, Senator Lippincott, got into a bit of a tussle with his fellow senators for publishing a column in which he intimated that DEI was responsible for recent airline crashes.
Oh, yes, I remember that. I'm sorry. I remember that, Fred. That was very, very, very widely reported. That definitely caused a stir. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and in that column, he talked about an appointee to the Federal Aviation Administration who had no aviation experience but had a lot of melanin in his skin, which is the way Senator Lippincott phrased it.
Yep.
Melanin, of course, being the bodily substance that darkens your skin. That didn't probably do the chances for his bill any good, but at the same time, the University of Nebraska campuses are moving on their own to adapt to the new directives coming out of Washington that say you shouldn't have DEI programs or you lose federal funding. So they have, several campuses have abolished their offices by that name and redistributed the responsibilities. So whether the legislature acts on it or not, that kind of movement is nevertheless taking place.
Okay, thank you. And so I've asked you about a lot of issues that we've reported on here on Siouxland Public Media that are in the Nebraska legislature. But before I let you go, Fred, is there any other legislative topic that you're tracking that I haven't asked you about?
In addition to the state-generated fiscal problems, there is also more recently talk about big impact from the federal budget cuts that are under discussion. Just this morning, on a bill that would extend child care subsidies at a cost of $17 million, the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee said that Nebraska could stand to lose over $400 million from the federal government under the Medicaid cuts that are under discussion. So the fiscal situation, even though it appeared to be improving in the latest fiscal forecast, because of this drop-off in federal funds, could turn bloody later on this session.
Okay, thank you. And the voice you just heard there was Fred Knapp. We've been having a discussion on where things stand in the Nebraska legislature. Fred is with Nebraska Public Media. Thank you, Fred, for giving insights on the machinations of the legislation and the unicameral.
You're welcome, and thank you for using the word machination.
Yeah, I have to use it at least once per year. I can't get it out of my blood. It's just been in there for 30 years. I cannot extricate that. So thank you. And there's more to play out until the Nebraska session ends on June 9th. For this edition of What's the Frequency, we just discussed some top-line bills and topics in the Nebraska unicameral, and now we're turning to similarly discuss high-profile measures being discussed in the South Dakota legislature. For that, I'm joined by Lee Strubinger. He's a political reporter for South Dakota Public Broadcasting. Thanks for taking time today, Lee.
Yeah, of course, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I know you were a guest last year. It was a great episode last year, and I appreciate you again today. There's 1 week left in the session. It wraps on Thursday, March 13th. On Monday, the 10th, I believe, is the last day for bills and joint resolutions to be passed in both chambers. Does that sound correct?
That does sound correct.
Okay. So as we record this, I just want to set the scene. There's only one full day left for action this week and then next week as well. To begin, it's important to know that South Dakota is hugely Republican, and the legislature is no exception. Republicans hold supermajorities in both chambers. And moreover, there's a new state executive team in South Dakota that has taken shape, and we want to talk about that first. Larry Roden, he's a longtime former state legislator. He's moved into the governor position as Republican Kristi Noem. She departed to lead the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Roden was sworn in on January 28th, and then on the 29th, he delivered a special address to a joint session of the legislature. He said that many issues lawmakers are facing this year are topics he worked on in the past, such as property taxes, eminent domain. During his speech, he also said that South Dakota must have fair and predictable regulations for businesses. Lee, how would you say Roden has been doing as governor in terms of communicating a vision and working with lawmakers?
Well, he certainly had to be doing it short and truncated amount of time. I believe this is the first time we've ever had a transition of power during a legislative session. This has kind of happened twice before, once in the 70s when a governor became the ambassador to Singapore, and then once in the early 90s when we had a governor die in a helicopter crash. But this is the first time that it has happened during session. So he's really been meeting with leadership and lawmakers throughout the session to sort of keep in touch with them and working on a lot of the priorities that lawmakers have this session. And you've also seen him kind of walking around the Capitol building and talking with folks. We call it on the third floor, which is where a lot of people kind of hang out. That's where the main chambers are at. And everybody who comes together for session really spends a lot of time.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any thoughts on how his approach, Governor Roden's approach, compares to the 6 or so years of Kristi Noem as governor?
I think, again, his approach really comes down to meeting with lawmakers and having a little bit more of a collaborative approach with legislators. In terms of public policy priorities, I mean, he's essentially carrying out the rest of Kristi Noem's term. He is going to, approach it with his ideas kind of in mind and his particular style. But one of the things that we've seen, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, is just in terms of the kind of property tax issue that we've had. He's brought several lawmakers together from across the state, across kind of ideological lines, for a kind of working group to come up with a bill idea that then they can carry and kind of champion throughout the kind of quick legislative session. So I think that's something that has been done in the past. It's not necessarily what Governor Noem did all the time on a lot of these like bigger issues. She did leave that to lawmakers to kind of handle by and large, but Governor Roden, because of his legislative background, has really kind of stepped in, brought people together, said, here's what we need to do, how can we do it, and get legislator buy-in to then kind of move forward.
Thank you for sharing that, Lee. It's been pretty roundly reported that this is a tough budget year in South Dakota. There's a budget deficit to make up. How many millions is that they're essentially trying to erase or figure out how to get through it?
I'm not entirely sure on an entire number because a lot of those are still kind of being worked out in terms of, it hasn't necessarily been like a budget deficit. It's been a very unique and weird kind of budget year. And part of why it's like weird and unique is because our ongoing revenue, while it's still up, the kind of main source of our ongoing revenue, which is money that we can count on coming in every year, is sales tax. And that is down. But we have other sort of buckets of ongoing revenue that are up, whether it's kind of your contractor's excise tax, et cetera. And then we also have a boatload of what we call one-time money that is essentially that. It's like maybe money we weren't entirely expecting or weren't particularly counting on, whether it might be budget reserves or we have this thing up here. I don't know if it's the same in Iowa and Nebraska, but we call it unclaimed property. And it's essentially if banks have accounts that have been kind of stagnant for 3 years, they try to find the rightful owner of those accounts. If they can't, they remit those dollars to the state. And the state holds on to that money. In the last year, we received like $300 million worth of unclaimed property. And it's essentially money that we can use, but it's also technically a liability. And so we're kind of in the midst of changing maybe how we view holding on to that unclaimed property. So again, it's kind of a weird budget year. It is going to be a leaner budget, but some of the cuts that were proposed by Governor Kristi Noem in December may not necessarily pan out the way that she kind of outlined it then. Lawmakers have had a chance to kind of make their own particular budget, and I hesitate to say what that's going to look like because it really always comes down to the last day.
Okay, thank you. And then in South Dakota, there's what so-called Big Three. Am I saying that correct? Right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So a big chunk of the state budget goes to state employees, teachers, et cetera. So who's in the Big Three, and has the pay raise for them or any pay raise been set at this point?
The Big Three is state employees, and full transparency, SDPB employees like
right.
I am are technically state employees, so I would be subject to that. But you also have money going towards education, and then basically Medicaid and community health care providers. They all get funded at kind of the same rate, and what the governor proposed was like a 1.25% increase in this particular budget. And again, kind of with the particulars of the budget that I would hesitate to comment on, the Big Three is like literally the last one of, if not the last thing that they put into the budget. They always try to give a little bit more than maybe what is kind of the baseline amount. But from what I've heard thus far, it still kind of seems like the 1.25% is where it's going to be at.
Okay. And it sounds like almost certainly will go down next week as a late decision next week then.
Yeah, either late Wednesday or Thursday for sure.
Okay, thank you. And I'm speaking here on What's the Frequency about the chief issues being discussed in the South Dakota legislature. My guest is Lee Strubinger. He's a reporter with South Dakota Public Broadcasting. There are a few bills that have been introduced that could create educational savings accounts to be used by students attending private schools. Those seem to have stalled in the South Dakota legislature, but that would allow the use of public dollars to fund private and alternative education. And nothing has passed at this point. I just want to make sure that's correct, right?
Yeah, that's correct. All those bills are disposed of.
Okay. And so do you think it's unlikely, or are they all dead and it just won't happen this session?
I think when it comes down to what our budget looks like, that it's really just not something that there's been a kind of appetite to make. I mean, there is an appetite for it with certain groups in the legislature, but by and large, given our particular budget situation, setting up a kind of additional education kind of ongoing cost is not really something that's kind of in the cards right now. And that's particularly been like picked apart when the governor who proposed the education savings accounts, Governor Noem at the time, talked about making a lot of cuts to state government, while also proposing what would likely be an ongoing cost going into the future, like a new program. Okay,
thank you. And of course, creating ESAs has been a growing thing throughout state legislatures in America. Iowa passed, this is the second full year that ESAs have been in Iowa. They continue to be very controversial. What can you say is in terms of breakdown for a way that you can kind of quantify or I guess anecdotally talk about who likes it, who doesn't like it, et cetera?
It really comes down to it's complicated because a lot of lawmakers come from rural areas in the state, and a lot of these smaller towns, the public school is kind of the community center, and several of these small towns would, some people have said would kind of die if the school was no longer there. Now, this particular idea that the governor proposed was just like a $4 million pilot program, but the more students that don't go to our public schools, that's less state money that would be going to those schools, and it would make it even harder to pay teachers well, keep the doors open, et cetera. So there is some tension. It's not necessarily rural or urban. I think you could make a general argument that Democrats here in the state are opposed to it, and Republicans are very kind of conflicted on it. You've got a lot of support for public education here in the building, but there is a growing organizational movement towards helping folks who are educating their kids either homeschool or in private school. And then there was like a homeschool group that was concerned about the governor's proposal for these education savings accounts, just kind of the concern about money potentially coming to them with kind of them being like government dollars and any kind of requirements that might be attached to those government dollars. So yeah, it's kind of a weird, kind of complicated issue for sure. But I think it definitely transcends kind of party line and rural urban divide for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for fleshing that out, Lee. I'm just, as you were talking, I was thinking back to when this was enacted in Iowa a couple of years ago. Not that this is an urban rural, but I remember that in some parts of Iowa, there just are no private schools. There isn't a parochial school. So certain legislators who maybe Republican legislators who might support it, well, there's none in my district. So it's just, this is a very complex, I think I really appreciate how you kind of gave the lay of the land of that. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about eminent domain. I know either yesterday or this morning, both chambers have now passed an eminent domain bill, and it's gone to the governor's desk. Am I saying that right? Can you explain what that bill does?
Yeah, so yesterday the South Dakota Senate passed a House bill that essentially says liquid carbon oxide projects are not allowed to use eminent domain to get easements for their projects. So it is headed to Governor Larry Roden's desk. It's a one-sentence bill. It basically says just that, and you could argue that it was kind of the premier top issue bill heading into this particular legislative session. I mean, last year there was a bill that was passed to it did like a bunch of different things, but it basically kind of regulated these projects. And we have the ability here in South Dakota where legislators can refer a law and put it on the ballot. It got referred, and then voters ultimately rejected that bill. It really felt like a referendum on the pipeline project itself. We have I think it's somewhere around 40% new lawmakers. The primary election here in South Dakota was all about eminent domain and this carbon pipeline project, and it remade the state legislature, and it just passed and made it to the governor's desk.
Okay, thank you. And then one more, I guess, kind of follow up with that. Why do South Dakotans feel so strongly about not having their land used via eminent domain to build a pipeline? Because potentially one way that I know that when the opposite side is saying, well, this could help businesses and it's a needed energy source.
Yeah, critics of the idea argue, hey, we grow a lot of corn here. We produce a lot of ethanol, and what ethanol plants want to do to help reduce their carbon score is tap into this pipeline that would essentially take this kind of liquefied carbon and dump it into North Dakota somewhere. And they say it would help with the kind of future viability of ethanol and, keep markets open for the corn that we produce. So the tension there is also just kind of the concern about the safety of these projects, and nobody really wants to have this pipeline next to their home. In the fall, I interviewed a farmer in Lake County who, we're sitting in his living room talking about this project, and out the window we can look into a field across the gravel road where the pipeline is expected to go, or where they want to route it. And so he loses sleep at night thinking about what would happen to my family if a rupture happens near our home. And so there's concern about safety. There's there's kind of a anti-Green New Deal element to it as well, and kind of the absurdity that some people see in terms of a private business basically getting tax credits from the federal government. So basically us paying taxes for this company to make a lot of money and run this through private property. But what it really comes down to is there's a strong property rights group of folks here in the state. That's a really big issue here in South Dakota. And it really, a lot of it boiled down to property rights and not wanting big corporations to be able to, do stuff on people's land that they don't have a say in.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. And I'm speaking here on What's the Frequency about the chief issues being discussed in the South Dakota legislature in 2025. They have about a week left of the session. My guest is Lee Strubinger. He's a reporter with South Dakota Public Broadcasting. There have been some proposals that could impact how South Dakota people vote in future elections. Some Republican lawmakers are continuing a trend of trying to make the petition process more difficult. For instance, Republican State Representative John Hughes, he led a resolution that would raise the percentage of voters needed to pass a constitutional amendment in statewide elections from 50% to 60%, more, I guess, higher threshold, sometimes called like a supermajority. That would match Florida and Illinois for the highest voting threshold amongst the 18 states that allow constitutional amendments through that initiative process. Can you give an update on that, Lee?
Yeah, so that was actually heard in a committee on Wednesday morning, a Senate committee. So that's an idea that started in the House, and a Senate committee just heard it and passed it. So the full South Dakota Senate will be voting on it very soon. One of the things to keep in mind is this is a particular kind of resolution that basically would put this question before the South Dakota voters. So if it passes the state Senate this year, it will be on the November 26th ballot, and basically voters will get to decide whether or not they want to raise that threshold from 50% to 60%. This is something that we have voted on in the past. I believe it was 2018, and it was to raise the threshold from 50 to 55%, and that was rejected. A lot of this is kind of in response to recent ballot questions that we've had. And in 2022, we passed a constitutional amendment to allow to basically force the state to provide Medicaid for the expansion population. We were one of the states that hadn't done that yet. And, since then, in the 24 election, there was another ballot question to allow for work requirements. There's another one that's going to be on the November 26th ballot to basically say if the federal government drops its 90 to 10 match for Medicaid, that we would be able to either adjust how we provide Medicaid to the expansion population or stop providing it altogether. So, and then there was also in 2024, there was a ballot question to an abortion rights ballot question that ultimately failed. But this is kind of in response to some of those questions that have made it on the ballot in recent years.
Okay, thank you. And I want to talk about the South Dakota State Library. The budget seems likely to be slashed. Perhaps 12 of the current 21 employees could be cut. The Legislative Joint Committee on Appropriations last week in late February advanced a bill making cuts to that state library funding. The cut has drawn criticism, but committee members say that what they did with this bill, it's a happy medium that saves the system overall. What is the latest for those cuts? And again, these are not individual libraries in individual towns, but this is the state, South Dakota State Library. What would be the latest on where that stands, and if they're carried out, how does that impact South Dakota people?
Yeah, so basically the state library, it does like a number of things here in South Dakota. It's kind of in charge of the interlibrary loan system, where they're kind of sending books back and forth from libraries in the state and even libraries out of state as well. They also provide a lot of library training for our rural libraries. We'll have librarians in very small towns that don't necessarily have a library sciences degree, and so they help those kind of smaller town libraries with actually running their library. They also provide access to a lot of databases that if individual libraries to pay for access to those databases, it would cost them a lot of money. And then you also have kind of like summer reading programming that state libraries can kind of offer to libraries across the state to provide for kids during those summer months. And so the kind of concern there is what this would kind of mean, or what would happen to our library system. Again, it kind of comes back to the budget. I haven't heard much lately in terms of where that might where things might stand in terms of that particular funding. So that's certainly something I'll be kind of keeping a watch on as it moves along.
Thank you for that, Lee. And then I guess as you approached that last week, just to wrap up here, I'll ask you: are there any other issues in South Dakota legislature that you're keeping an eye on that are worth to mention here before I let you go?
Yeah, it's certainly a big deal here, and might be in Nebraska. I don't know about for Iowans, but we have been for the last several years been trying to build a men's prison near Sioux Falls. Our current men's prison is like 144 years old. It's like older than statehood. It's really kind of fallen apart and decrepit. And for years, we've been setting aside like hundreds of millions of dollars into a fund to basically build a new men's prison. When it comes down to it, we got a final price tag to build this facility in November at no more than $825 million. There's a lot of concern about the proposed site for this particular project, and it would have required legislative approval to make happen. This kind of new majority that I was talking about earlier, the kind of new like 40% of lawmakers, came in this year with a lot of questions about this particular project, a lot of concerns about this particular project. It's a lot of money for a small state like South Dakota to spend.
Sure.
And so the governor basically had been pushing for it kind of early on as Governor Roden took office. But then it became really clear a couple of weeks ago that the support to get this thing moving at all, it just was not there in the House. So he essentially took a step back and said, hey, we're going to do a reset on this prison project. And he signed an executive order to basically say this group of lawmakers and interested parties are going to meet 4 times starting in February. From February to July, they're going to look at different ideas and different projects and ways to kind of move this forward. And the hopes is to have a special session in July to approve some kind of project that the state can move forward with. And that's really been a big deal here in the state.
Okay, thank you. And just as a follow-up, is it still roughly Sioux Falls location, or might it potentially change?
It could potentially change. The original idea was in the Sioux Falls location. The idea being that's where the current prison workforce is, and to have the workforce available to staff a 1,500 bed minimum maximum security prison facility that would exist in kind of the Sioux Falls area. Could get a little tougher around the rest of the state, but we'll see what they come up with.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your time. That you fleshed out a lot of issues concerning the South Dakota legislature, and again, they're wrapping up one more week, the second full week, and about a week from now, they should be wrapping up. Thank you for joining us, Lee.
Yeah, Brett, thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this edition of What's the Frequency. Many thanks to my guests, Lee Strubinger of South Dakota Public Broadcasting and Fred Knapp of Nebraska Public Media. We at Siouxland Public Media will continue in upcoming days and weeks to give you updates to newscasts and other avenues as to what's happening in the state legislatures of Nebraska, South Dakota, and Iowa. As we move into a second year for this show, thanks for being part of our station as we work every day to tell the stories of Siouxland that inform, entertain, and expand the mind. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week. What's the Frequency airs on Fridays at 10 a.m. and again on Sundays at 2 p.m. Make sure you check out a few of our Siouxland Public Media music shows that air at 10 p.m. as well, as we have Hip Hop Chronicles on Thursdays, Mixtape Dance Party on Fridays, and 10 o'clock Blues on Saturdays. For Siouxland Public Media News, I'm Brett Hayward.
Should we talk about the weather? Should we talk about the government?